Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just click the link in the show description to support now.
Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Today we're going to be talking well, I can't even say what we're going to talk about. It's a surprise. But joining me to co-host is Michael Hawley.
Hello again.
Mr. So when Michael's here, then we're talking something back when he was a teenager. So something back in the 1800s.
You're the same age as me, Al. So we just know it.
Yeah. So what we do all the way from the UK, we have a guest, Andrew Firth, and he's written a book called Ripperland, and now he's got a book called Pictures of the Abyss. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, before we get into what you've just done here, what got you into writing books, period, and this whole subject of the time period and what you're doing?
That's a good way to start. Is that I would say that I've always been fascinated by London as I was growing up, because I live about 200 miles away from London, and so it was always the big city, and I became interested in the history of it. And I remember when I was probably about 19 or 20, I've just started working. A colleague of mine bought a magazine, a murder casebook, special magazine about Jack the Ripper, and he brought it into work to show me, and it had a replica newspaper of the Illustrated Police News. And that got me hooked. It turned out later on I found out that whole thing had been written by Paul Begg, although if he was ever credited with it, I never saw his name. It must have been in very small print. So that kind of got me hooked. And so, as well as going down to London to meet friends and what have you, I also like to sort of go wandering the streets and taking photographs. And over the years, that sort of developed into doing old and new comparisons of street scenes and what have you. And so my first book, it's not really, I wouldn't really call myself an author in the sense of writing books, because although there is text in my books, that it's really a case of they are picture coffee table style books. They're mainly visual. But basically the first book I did that was released by Mango a few years ago was Ripperland, and that's concentrating on the Jack the Ripper related locations of Whitechapel and Spitalfields. And so this new book, Pictures of the Abyss, is still looking at the same area, although maybe with a bit of a wider vision, because it takes in more of the East End, and it's looking at the locations visited by the American author Jack London in 1902 when he was researching his People of the Abyss. And so that's what it's all about, really.
I was going to say too, like when you go through these pictures and you take these pictures, and I think that it really shows how life was back then in the early 20th century, because I think quite often people are so distant away that they don't really know what it would be like to live in London in those times.
That's right. Yeah. One thing that always strikes me is when you're reading a book about history or crime, They're not very visual, these books. They tend to be obviously heavy on text, and so you're left sort of not really being able to picture in your own mind how things were and how things looked. And so what I do is I merge the old photographs, in this case from 1902, with modern day photographs taken from the same viewpoints. So you can see the contrast and you can see what remains. I mean, sometimes the scene's relatively unchanged. You know, the buildings are still there, but in other cases, things have changed dramatically. So it's sort of a way of documenting visual history, if you like.
Andrew, this is Mike. When I looked at those pictures, the exciting thing about it is when you merge those, you matching it up. You're matching it up to 1902, which is a few years after the Whitechapel murders, but it's really around that time. And there's so much change, but you could see the sidewalks and buildings sometimes were the same. Did you have difficulty finding those spots?
Well, that's really what the whole Pictures of the Abyss project has been about, because people have seen those photographs in the various reprints of Jack London's book, and they've been used in Ripper books as well because they're covering the same area. But a lot of the photographs are just captioned, say, for example, a house to let, or the Jewish ghetto, something like that, or the ghetto market. And there's no specific details as to where those photographs were taken. So every single photograph, I've had to do a lot of research to work out, first of all, the location and the direction that Jack London was facing when he took the photographs, because he actually took the photographs himself once he'd done his investigative journalism side of actually writing the book. But to actually get the exact locations has been quite difficult, and I've had to refer to street directories and old maps and things like that. So basically, it's been a lot of fun. It's been very enjoyable because it's like solving a puzzle every time. You get this strange street scene that Jack London took, and just by looking at, say, for example, the way the sun casts the buildings cast shadows on the streets. Right. You can tell which direction it's taken, and maybe there's a small business sign on a shop or something, and you can check the street directories to find out where that was. So it's been very rewarding. And then when you actually go to the location in modern day, I mean, I've been stunned to go there and go, oh yes, there we are, there it is. Even if all the buildings are changed, the actual viewpoint is the same. It's quite easy to see that it is the same location. So
what's interesting is how I found out about Jack London, and to me it's still amazing because every time I hear Jack London, it sounds like he's from London, but he's an American.
He is, yeah. Awesome.
But he's taking photographs in London, and then there's this famous Dorset Street photograph. That's where I got heard about Jack London. Is it true that he did not take that photo?
I don't think he did, because recent years, other photos of Dorset Street have surfaced, which clearly look as though they were taken on the same day. The vehicles on Dorset Street are in the same place and everything. And as far as I can tell, when you look at the photograph itself and compare it with the other photos that Jack London took, it's a different style of photograph altogether. And I've read that it's from about 1895, so it's a lot more contemporary with Jack the Ripper. And I think what it was, I mean, if you think about it, if you're somebody who's done this project of going underground and living with poor people in the East End, and you're aware of how desperate the situation is in those areas, you're not going to be wandering around, say, for example, the worst street in London, which is Dorset Street, with camera equipment. And so I think it would have been very, very tempting for him to use an existing photo, which is what I believe he actually did. I see. Yeah. But most of the photographs out. I did indeed. In fact, I used that photo in Ripperland. There are some of the photos from Jack London's book which we used in photo montages in Ripperland. And what I've done is I've included them again in this new book, but I've reworked them so that they're different. They use different modern-day photographs, and they're sort of merged together in different ways. So people who bought Ripper Land aren't going to feel cheated that they've got the same scene again, sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yes, I mean, basically, if I've been able to identify the location from Jack London's photographs, then it's in the book. The one or two that eluded me, which I didn't find, but the majority I have found. So, yeah.
Speaking of Jack London, it sounds like you had to get into him a little bit. Did he get any kind of advice from anyone to know where to go to his location?
Well, that's the part of the story of the people of the Abyss, because Jack London talks about how he's looking for advice on going to the East End, and he famously goes to the offices of Thomas Cook, the travel agents, on Cheapside, which is a street in the city of London. And they were famously they commented that they were unable to help him because nobody ever asked for advice on going to the East End, despite the fact it was only a couple of miles away. And they could take you to Peru and the Africa and various exotic places, but they couldn't take you a few miles away because there was never any demand to go to the East End. And in the end, he sought out advice from the police, which led him to speaking to Sergeant William Thick, who, of course, everyone knows.
Oh, Johnny Upright. Johnny Upright.
So Jack London actually visited Johnny Upright at his home.
Really?
He was living in the East End. And that's one of the things in the book, actually. Myself and Mark Ripper, who goes under the author name of M.W. Aldrich, we've managed to trace a photograph that shows Johnny Upright's home, where Jack London actually visited him to seek advice. So that's one of the little surprises for people when they get the book. So.
Right, that's exciting because the people that do research for Jack the Ripper, Sergeant Thick was the one that arrested John Pizer, who was the leather apron, and that's a significant part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, it is. He's one of the more well-known characters in the Ripper story, and it's nice that there's a crossover to the Jack London story. I mean, if you do a text search on through the whole of Jack London's book, you'll only find Jack the Ripper mentioned once. So it's not about Jack the Ripper, but of course there is this big crossover with having Sergeant Thick in the story, as it were. So, and his description of Sergeant Thick is quite a joy to read as well. It's well worth seeking out a copy of Jack London's book, if only for that. It's interesting. So.
What's exciting about what you're doing, Andrew, with these pictorial representations is when you look at the ripperology world, you have these experts such as Paul Baggage you spoke about and others, and that then there's experts that are working on specific suspects, specific victims, or the victims themselves. It helps with the bigger picture, the whole story itself. And so now, with all that expertise, I'm sure you probably are involved with the East End Conference?
Yes, I'm one of the organisers of the East End Conference, yes.
Oh, okay. And did you do packets for them as well with the photos, or? I
do all the graphics and the design and layouts of the booklets that the delegates get. So when you see a poster for the East End Conference, that's my design work, is that.
Oh, okay, great.
And so sometimes I will do a photo montage of a location in the East End just for the delegates booklet. It's sort of a thing that I still enjoy doing. Although I have to be fair that it's fair to say that I'm running out of old photographs that can be used. So, I've done most of them really, certainly in the Ripper world, which is one of the reasons why I moved on to Jack London, because there were so many photographs that hadn't been identified as to where they were. So it was nice to find those.
Right. Is there still more?
Not at the moment. In fact, I've been thinking about this. I've been asked by other people what's my next project, and I haven't a clue. I really don't know. I mean, this is the thing. It may just be a photography type project. It may not have any montages in it, but you've got to have the actual photographs, and a lot of them are held by various libraries and archives who will charge you quite a lot of money to use them in books. I mean, the picture of that includes Sergeant Thick's house was held by the Tower Hamlets Library, and they charged me £50 to use that one photograph, in the book.
Oh my gosh!
So if you were to do a book full of ones that were held in archives, it would be a very expensive outlay for something that is of niche interest, really. So I'm not sure yet. I'm sure there will be another project in the future, but it really depends on me finding photographs that are either out of copyright or whom the copyright owner will grant me the permission to use them. So.
Right. One of the exciting things that I try to do is when most of Tumbledy's life is in Canada, the United States, and I find out that every single building, almost every building is already raised. So nothing, very little is around. And but it's exciting to find the spot. Now, did that happen a few times?
It did. I mean, there's one photograph which immediately springs to mind. It's a view in Wapping. Now, Wapping's just south of the area of Whitechapel and Spitalfields. But this photograph shows this rather ramshackle line of buildings. There are people out on the streets, gas lamps and everything, and it's just captioned "a view in Wapping," and that's all Jack London tells us. So there was a lot of work involved to actually trace where that was, and the one clue in the photograph was, if you look very carefully in the very distance on the horizon, is the church tower of St George in the East, which obviously Ripper students know as being where the mortuary was, where Elizabeth Stride was taken. And so I then went looking for all the streets in Wapping, in modern day Wapping, that pointed in the direction of St George in the East, and eventually I found the street. But it was only when I finally got there to the actual location to take the modern day shot, and I turned around to face the direction of St George in the East, and I just went, wow, that's it. There are none of the original buildings there, but you could still see the church tower in the distance, and you could see the end wall of one building, an old school that was built in the 1850s that still stood, and it matched exactly. So that was a real sort of thrill to find that out. So yeah, that was good.
A question about, and I always forget, I get into detail too much and I forget, the audience might not, but that East End Conference, what is that?
Well, it's basically a gathering in London, and it's basically it's a Ripper themed conference. We have quite a few talks on Jack the Ripper, but because we're the East End Conference, we can also have other talks as well about other East End themed topics. So anything to do with East End history, really. But it's held over a weekend. We have 3 or 4 talks on the Saturday and 3 or 4 on the Sunday. We usually also do it in conjunction with the Whitechapel Society, so they will host something in the evening on the Saturday as well. So and delegates can get into their meeting for free. And I tend to, on the Friday night, for anybody who comes to London on the day before, we have a walk around Whitechapel or Spitalfields in the evening, and people can take night photos, and then if they want to, they can enter them into a photo competition that we hold, where people will vote on what their favourite photograph is. Now, obviously, we should have been holding a conference next month, in October, and we've had to postpone it until late spring next year, simply because of course of the COVID restrictions that we're all currently under. So so next year's conference will be early. It'll be in April, but it effectively will be the speakers that we had lined up for this conference.
Oh, okay, right. So yes, that's now you said the first book, pictorial book, was Ripperland, and that was just recently published as well. Am I correct with that?
That was published in 2017, but because what happens is that there have been various print runs of it, and when the book sells out, people are saying, how do I get a copy of this? And so when the demand's there, my publisher, Adam Wood, Mango Books, will set the wheels in motion on printing a new print run. Now, at the present time, Ripperland is out of print again. It does tend to sell very well when a new print run is done. But we are planning on reprinting it again because we're expecting people
because I'm waiting for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect maybe a month or two after this first print run of Pictures of the Abyss is complete, we'll do another print run of Ripperland, which will be available from the Mango Books website.
You'll eventually have it. Will you? I think Ripperland, though, you can get it an ebook through Amazon, maybe.
It is available on Amazon as a Kindle version. Now, obviously, that's fine. If it is designed as a coffee table book, it's really just a compromise for those people who don't want to wait for the next print run. But obviously, it's worth mentioning that you need to be viewing it on a monitor screen or at very least an iPad. Don't try and view it on an iPhone or whatever, because it's just not going to look good at all. It's,
right.
Tiny. It's designed to be viewed at sort of standard paper size, A4 size. So it's it's a compromise is the electronic version, but that's available in perpetuity. Is that? Yeah.
So I can see you as such a photographer that part of it is kind of probably you prefer the paperback anyway, so you can see these photos.
Yes, the paper copy is what it was intended for, and I resisted getting a Kindle version done for quite a few years. But what I effectively because of the fact that it was difficult to get the book printed during the lockdown period, we thought, well, let's do an ebook version just as a sort of a stopgap, really. So yeah, but that's always available if anybody wants it.
Now, how did you get to know Jack London, and maybe who more, in more detail on who Jack London was that you would use?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I heard of Jack London probably the same way that you did. A lot of Jack the Ripper books are illustrated, obviously with the famous picture of Dorset Street, but with certain other ones. I was trying to think of one that. Any of the photographs that illustrate the poverty in the area quite often find their way into Ripper books, and of course then I've picked up on this person Jack London. So a bit of an online search, and it turns out he was one of the leading authors of his day. He wrote many fiction titles. Was very popular, and continues to be to this day. I mean, there's even a Jack London Facebook group. He's a popular author to this day. But I was quite surprised, really, to find that he'd written so much, and not all of it was fiction. Some of it was non-fiction, which, of course, includes The People of the Abyss. But rather tragically, I mean, he was 26 when he investigated and wrote The People of the Abyss, and he only lived to the age of 40. He died in 1916, which is a particularly young age, really. So. But that's how I discovered him anyway. That literally through the Ripper connection and seeing this name Jack London. So I thought, well, who is he? And then it turns out that these photographs and the book itself is well out of copyright. Anybody can republish it, and of course that gave me free rein to do as I wanted with the photographs as well.
So you did not need permission and special permission for those photos? Not
at all. And in actual fact, most of the photographs are held as very, very high resolution scans, because Jack London mounted his photographs in albums, and they're held at the Jack London Archives somewhere in the United States, but they're freely available online, and you can, as long as you attribute where you've taken the photos from, then you're free to use them. So I've had access to some very, very clear versions of the photographs, and they're a lot clearer than normally gets reproduced in books, because obviously with book printing technology over the years, photographs have been made up of tiny little dots, and so you've not really had the best quality, whereas of course now with our digital printing that we have, the photographs are probably the clearest they've ever been seen. And in addition to that, there are also photographs in these albums held in the archives that never made it into the book, but they're clearly of the East End, and I've been able to identify where a few of those are. So, Pictures of the Abyss actually has photographs that were taken by Jack London and weren't used in the book, so that's kind of an added bonus, really.
I'm curious that here it is. Here's Jack London in the East End with an American accent. I wonder if that was an issue for him.
No, it wasn't. I mean, he says in People of the Abyss that his cover story when he went down to ground was that he was an American sailor who landed at the
really?
the dock in the East End, yeah, and he'd lost all his money and was down and out and was desperately trying to get the money together to secure his passage back to the United States.
We at Wondery, creators of Dr. Death, Scamfluencers, and Over My Dead Body, go deeper into complex true crime stories to give you an inside look at the facts. And now we're launching the ultimate true crime fan destination, Exhibit C. It's truly criminal. Wondery's Exhibit C gives you the detective's lens of all of the evidence, taking you step by step through the twists and turns of each true crime case. Join the Exhibit C online community to access exclusive show merchandise, member-only content, and to hear directly from top criminal and social justice experts, witnesses, and investigators as they take us beyond the evidence and into the case file. Join now by following Wondery Exhibit C on Facebook or find us on the web at WonderyExhibitC.com and listen to true crime podcasts on Wondery and Amazon Music. Exhibit C. It's truly criminal.
So that was his cover story, and in fact, on one, I think he met up with a couple of other down and out people who were making their way to the popular workhouse, and they were walking up Mile End Road, and they were saying to him, you're young, you're a strong man, you need to take this opportunity to get yourself out of here and get back, get back onto a ship and work your passage back to America, because there's nothing for you. There's nothing for you here in the East End. Of course, they want to know that he was actually a journalist in sort of doing what we would now call investigative journalism. It's quite strange, but yeah, he was. That was his cover story. Really, he was a sailor from America down on his luck.
Now, you are not from London, so how are you familiar with all these locations that you could just walk? It's just because you've been there so much?
Yes, just because I've been there so much, I'm fascinated by maps. And for example, with the Jack Ripper case, for me, it's the locations, it's the streets and the buildings. That's what fascinates me. I'm perfectly happy to read about suspect theories and police investigation techniques, but for me, it's the actual locations, which ties in nicely with my sort of passion for photography and things. But yeah, I've always liked London, and it's my favourite place to go. Some people are quite happy, going to tropical islands on holiday and things. But for me, if I can get a few days in London and go wandering the streets, that's when I'm happiest, really. I have a lot of friends down in London now, so it's nice to meet up with them and talk over the case and things like that. So yeah, it's good. But that's basically how familiarity has just come with me going there so much, and obviously taking photos and tracking the changes that have taken place to the area over the time I've been going, which now is about 25 years. So yeah.
Right. So it's interesting because Stuart Evans hates to go to London. He likes to stay home. And then I think Paul Begg is no longer in that area either. So
no, that's it. I mean, some people like it, some people don't. But to be honest, I live in a semi-rural area in Yorkshire, and it's nice to get to the city and get a fix of London every now and again. It's I do like it. So.
Well, it's kind of like I live in New York, the state of New York, which is huge, but the city of New York is just on the east side, so I live 8 hours away. But still, people around here like to visit New York City, but would not like to live there.
No, I mean, I've just been to New York City once, and I could understand that it's a hectic mesh of streets and everything, but very exciting. You know, it's something that somewhere you can dip in and out of as you like, really. Which is the same for London, really. It's a different kind of city as London, but it's still one of those places that, you know, it's exciting to go to and wander around.
Right.
Now, I was going to say, what do you think Jack London wanted people to get out of his book?
I think really it's a little bit more like I think he wanted to expose the fact that at the time, you know, the England, the United Kingdom was, you know, it was the British Empire it was the biggest empire in the world, and we British people like to make out that we were a proud country and all the rest of it, but that behind the scenes, you know, you could go to all these grand places in London and not see the poor, and not see all the squalor, but it was there, you know. And I think he wanted to expose that. I think that's really what he was looking at. And it was so. I mean, literally, you know, the areas he went to, which are Whitechapel, Spitalfields, Wapping, Bethnal Green, they're all within half an hour's walking distance of the City of London, which in itself is where the money's made. You know, even today it's one of the world's leading financial centres. And yet, just on the doorstep is all this property. So I think that was his main sort of aim was to expose that this sort of thing went on. You know, these people were living a hand-to-mouth existence, and in many ways that situation hadn't changed since the time of Jack the Ripper. So, you know, we're now out of the Victorian era into the Edwardian era, and this kind of thing is still going on. I'm not sure why he chose London, because he could possibly have chosen somewhere in the United States, but maybe it wasn't quite as prevalent in the United States. I don't know. Hard to say, really.
Well, and so
probably his last name.
Yeah. And so
yeah, good.
Your changing of this, like your perception of it, and your redoing of a lot of the photos. What is it that you are wanting people to get when they see the book and go through it?
I suppose really it's to illustrate how things have changed. So, I mean, a lot of the locations that Jack London took photos of were very deprived. The buildings were ramshackle, and rightly so that they've been demolished. I mean, I don't think that they would have stood up that long anyway. I mean, certainly the street I mentioned in Wapping was all completely demolished a couple of years after Jack London visited. And the buildings, there are some old buildings that are on that street now that were built in 1905, you know, so it's, things were changing rapidly. But I think my sort of idea is that, I mean, if people want to go and visit these locations, they can see how the old photograph fits into the modern day scene if they've got my book. And I think what fascinates me is it's incredible because so much of it's been swept away, to suddenly find a building that's still there and hasn't been altered. You know, it's survived 2 world wars, and years and years of threats from developers and what have you, and you still find that some buildings are standing proud, and it's quite reassuring in a sense from a historical point of view that some things, you know, still continue to still continue to survive, really. So I suppose that's really what it is. It's a case of what's still there and what isn't there anymore. It's really showing that in a visual way.
So the pictures of the abyss, I'm sure if you have these photographs, do you have some kind of map that kind of matches, puts it all in one picture, kind of?
Well, what I've done is each location has a small excerpt on each page, showing the location of the photograph. It's from the Ordnance Survey maps, and I've marked it with a little red pin with an arrow. So basically, it shows where Jack London was stood and which direction he was facing in on the map, so you can work that out. Now, obviously, these maps are only little maps in the corner of each page. So what I've done is at the end of the book, where the index is, I've also done a London-wide map that spans 2 pages, which shows the page numbers, so you can see which part of London it's in, as well as the local area where the photo was taken. So basically, there's effectively a pictorial index at the back of the book showing you where everything is. You know?
Yeah. So you could use this not only at the coffee table, but when you visit London, you could bring this with you.
Yes, that's it. You could use it as a guide, or you could possibly refer to it before you came, and then seek out some of the sites. But that's really sort of part of what it's all about too. Part of my intention is that people can look at these places through fresh eyes, because you may have walked past. I mean, some of the locations that Jack London took photos at. Many people into the Jack the Ripper case will walk past many times and not realise that that's where a photo was taken. I mean, there is a photograph that's captioned "A House to Let," and although it's difficult to see where it was taken, it turns out it's literally just north of Spitalfields Market, which obviously is a stone's throw away from the 10 Bells and Dorset Street. So, you know, it will give people new things to look out for when they visit London for their usual Jack the Ripper fix, if you like. So. Right.
Although Don Rumbelow, who was an expert that he's since retired, he would be sitting in the 10 Bells Club, and you could get his signature. So, are you going to be there, Andrew, when I go there?
I don't know. It depends when you go. I mean, I've not been to London since New Year. And in fact, New Year was when I was taking the last photographs of the book, and I'm so glad that I managed to get all the photographs done at New Year, because obviously very shortly after we went into lockdown.
Right.
But next week I am actually going to London for the first time in 8 months, so it'll be nice just to have a bit of a wander and take some new photographs. Not for any particular purpose, just because it's nice to go back and wander around. But normally, I'm usually there about 7 or 8 times a year, even though I live, several hundred miles away. It's my favourite place to go to. Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, Al, did you have a question?
No, that wasn't me.
Oh, okay. So the question, how about the 10 Bells Club? Do you have a photograph of that one, or?
Now then, the 10 Bells Public House is actually. It appears in a couple of montages, because what happened, what Jack London actually found, one location where he found people sleeping rough was the famous Itchy Park. And some of the photographs that feature in Jack London's book, and some of the unpublished photographs, were taken around the steps of Christchurch. And in the background of one of them, you can see the 10 Bells, and also the pawnbrokers where that Ripper victim Catherine Eddowes visited. So it does feature, but not particularly heavily, I wouldn't say. I mean, the focus isn't on the 10 Bells itself as such in this book. Obviously, it features in Ripperland, but that's a different focus, really.
Was there a favorite location, or do you have multiple favorites that you have when you were doing this?
Yeah, I probably have multiple favourites, ones that have been really hard to work out where they were. And when the eureka moment came, it was like, oh my goodness, there it is. I've managed to match up this photograph. Can't wait to get this, sort of thing. I'm trying to think, really. The one particular location that was very challenging was there is a photograph in Jack London's book that just says "A View in Hoxton," and that was very hard to find, because my knowledge of Hoxton, which is north of Shoreditch and Spitalfields and Whitechapel, my knowledge of that area is very poor. But I managed to find it through one tantalisingly small sign on a building, which was a business name, and eventually I traced where it was. And so when I went to it, the streets were still in the same layout and everything, but obviously all the buildings have changed. But I think that's probably one of my favourites as well, because it matches up so well. So yeah, that's probably one of my favourites.
The Mango books with Adam Wood, Al and I, we interviewed Adam, and I had a great interview with him. And so with that, it automatically went to pretty much the Ripper world. And so we are eating this up. But it sounds to me like this would be even exciting for others because it really does have a historical, it's like a pictorial history of that East End. Yes, that's right. I mean, I think I'm loath to call it a customer base, but yeah, the sort of the captive audience, if you like, is not at this time isn't just ripperologists. It's people who are interested in social history, the East End of London, or just London in general. You know, it's and of course people who are fans of Jack London, because this effectively is like a visualization of his book. It doesn't repeat the entire book; it quotes from it. But if you've got Jack London's book, then my book is effectively like a visual documentation of the locations that he refers to and mentions. And I've thrown a few other locations in there that are of interest, things that were built in 1902 when Jack London was staying in that area, just to give a more complete picture of the area. So yeah, that's really what I'm aiming at. It's a companion piece rather than a complete retelling of the story. It's more sort of a visualization of what Jack London experienced at the time. Right. And then, so you were saying that you don't really know where you want to go from here, but do you want to go through photograph though, still like you've been doing? Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't really consider myself as an author as such. I have to force myself to write things. I mean, I was always told at school my command of English was excellent and my writing was good, but I never really enjoyed the process. But when it comes to visual things, I absolutely love it. I can lose myself, for a whole day working on things in Photoshop, and I absolutely love it. And with pictures of the abyss, it's involved a lot more research than Rippleland did, because Rippleland I just knew where everything was. So pictures of the abyss has been a really fun thing to do. There's been a lot of revelations. I mean, like for example, a lot of the captions in Jack London's book were incorrect. So there's really? Yeah, I mean, there's one picture that shows a row of buildings and it says the Mile End Road, and it turns out it's not the Mile End Road, it's Whitechapel Road, which is an easy mistake to make because the two lead on from each other. But I was able to sort of pinpoint that was an error. So yeah, little things like that. So.
So, do you think this is going? Would any of these pictures help in the Jack the Ripper crime itself, or maybe other crimes that were going on? Because that wasn't the only one.
When you say help, how do you mean?
Well, just showing the area and showing detail of different parts of the East End, because there was it was a very crime-ridden area, wasn't it?
Yes. Oh, I mean, absolutely. It was a very dangerous place. I mean, people talk about Dorset Street being dangerous, but every street had its hidey holes and what have you. So yeah, I mean, the thing that sort of becomes apparent when you see the photographs that Jack London took is that he when he was taking photographs, he stuck to the main roads, the main sort of thoroughfares. He didn't go into very, very narrow alleyways. He played it safe. So there are a lot of areas that I'm sure were crime-ridden that Jack London chose not to take photographs of, or didn't even venture to. But you can see that on the shop fronts of the main streets like Commercial Street and Whitechapel High Street, they have. They're respectable. They're perfectly. It's a little bit like Booth's poverty map. You look at that, and you've got the businesses facing onto the main roads being very respectable, but then you've got your criminal classes coloured black on Booth's poverty map in the back alleyways and streets. And I think that they were the areas that Jack London probably avoided for safety's sake. So you're not going to get very, very sort of visual representations of crime and deprivation, but there is some hint at it in the photographs that Jack London took.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Just now, do you have a website or something that people can come find you on or locate you?
There's not a website as such, but I do have a page on Facebook which is just called Ripperland. And there's some examples of the photo montages from both Pictures of the Abyss and Ripperland on there. So there's a page there. And also, I may as well take this opportunity to plug, there's a Facebook group that I run called the Jack the Ripper Photography Group. So if anybody wants to search that one out, that basically is where people can share photographs, both old and new, of the Whitechapel and Spitalfields area. So that may be of interest to people, both from a Jack London and a Jack the Ripper perspective. So go check that one out.
And where will they be able to get the new book?
Well, the new book is basically being, at the moment we're taking pre-orders, although I think by the time this show goes out, the pre-orders will have closed, but there will be some copies left. But it's basically, you can order the book from mangobooks.co.uk. It's possible it may be available through Amazon at a later date. But as it stands, that's the place to go to at the moment. So it's mangobooks.co.uk. And pre-orders are numbered and signed by me, and then there'll be some copies left over afterwards. But if you do want a copy and you like what you see on the Ripperland Facebook page, then don't delay, because apparently, according to my publisher Adam, these things just they go very quickly. So, and it's not a cheap book to print either. It's quite expensive, so it tends to be done in limited runs. So if you want a copy, go for it.
Right. And Ripperland as well. That's you should. I recommend that one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Ripperland, as I say, is out of print at the moment, but we will be running another print run of that probably in the next month or two. I mean, that's really up to Adam when he does that. But obviously, we'll be making announcements on the Ripperland page and on various other Jack the Ripper Facebook groups when that goes live again, and people can pre-order a copy of that. Yeah.
On your Ripperland book, what was the purpose behind that for you? Like, what is it? It's different than this. So, what did you want people to get out of that?
Well, it's still the same kind of thing of look at this, look how things have changed over the years. Because a lot of people, I think really the angle I was taking with Ripperland, and I mentioned this in the introduction, is that when Ripper tour groups take their customers around the Ripper sites, there's not really much to see. I mean, people walk into Mitre Square, and apart from the sort of even the footprints change now of the actual square, but there's not a great deal to see, and you've really got to use your imagination. But by pasting the old photographs into the modern day scenes, you can sort of then imagine where things used to be. But certainly, I mean, you've got Dutfield's Yard, the Elizabeth Strides murder site. That went in 1909. That was completely swept away. 29 Hambridge Street's underneath a brewery building now, or the site of it is. What else have we got? Dorset Street, of course, long ago swept away. It's now under a complex of offices. So there's not a lot to see, really. I mean, there are plenty of the old buildings, but the actual murder sites themselves have been swept away. Really, the only one that's tangibly still there, apart from Mitre Square, is Bucks Row behind Whitechapel Tube Station. And even that's been closed off for the past 6 years because they're rebuilding the station for a brand new railway line, the Crossrail, or the Elizabeth line as it's now called. So I suppose really it's a case of, if you're going around the sites, then have a look at my book, because that should paint a more vivid picture of what used to stand in these rather empty or rebuilt locations that you see today when you go on the tours. That's really sort of the angle for that.
I noticed that since Bucks Row is a little farther away, a lot of the tours don't include that.
Mm-hmm. They also miss out Dutfield's Yard as well. Yeah, it's a shame, really. But I mean, it's about 15 minutes walk away. But I understand the reasons why tour groups don't include it, because effectively for somebody who's paid to go on a tour, they want to be seeing things as they go, and to have a really quiet period of 15 minutes while you're walking up to Bucks Row is probably not the best the most entertaining way to spend 15 minutes. And also, of course, it takes people further away from where they've started. So, yeah.
And why I would have loved that is because across from the London Hospital, just to the left, a little bit to the left, I discovered that there was this wax museum, Chamber of Horrors wax museum going on, where the proprietor was within hours would have a wax display effigy of the latest victim. So in the basement there were six of those, including Tabram. And then, so that was, and that's not the same place as where the Elephant Man was, which I found out, but it was to the left. So I was hoping that Bucks Road would be involved, and then they would kind of go there and say, "Oh, I know, Mike Hawley found this," but not to be.
No, sadly not. No, but I mean, certainly when they finally finished rebuilding Whitechapel Station, there should be schools. You should still be able to walk down Bucks Row or Durwood Street, as it's called today. You should be able to get back there. But at the moment, it's all fenced off, and there are construction workers on that point.
Well, they should have left all the stains and body parts there.
Well, no. Probably not the best thing to do. But,
yeah.
Oh, come on. Have a little fun.
That's fun.
Well, it's certainly been a pleasure having you on and talking about this. I think it's fascinating. The photos and the whole idea of it captures something that you can never get back. It's gone. So again, our guest has been the man that has written, or I don't know, you've not written, but has done 2 books, primarily around pictures. And we're going to have them up on our website so people listening can do one click and pick them up through their website. Andrew Firth, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.